Welcome everyone to another episode of the Polynesian Eyes podcast. How are you doing today, Masi?
Doing good. Weekday. It is Wednesday here. Just doing the normal week stuff. Did some cleaning and uh, didn't go to work today. Just took another sick leave. You, just because I can. So, but other
Yeah.
other than that, other
Is
than
it
that, it's all good.
yeah, is it one of those use it or lose it kind of deals?
Yes, it's one of those
Okay.
lose it or yeah. So yeah, everything's good. So yeah, used it before I lose it. So might as well just use it. So
Not
yeah.
100%. We all need those, man. We all need those days to re-energize, refocus.
Mm,
And we've had a pretty successful couple days on social media. We
yeah.
really appreciate everybody's comments, pros
Feedback.
and
Yeah.
the positive and the negatives. We appreciate
Mm,
interaction. That's what we want. We want conversations. We want ideas to be presented on the table so that viewers and listeners can hear for themselves what the different ideas are that are out there on, our culture, our history, how we interact with each other as Polynesians. Also, is as many of us are Christians, how we
mm,
perceive the religion um, of the God that brought us to the Pacific, Hikuleo, and that's the Christian God that we believe in today, and that is the same being, and kind of understanding those things. So once again, want to thank everybody for the support, the positive feedback, the ideas. We have a very exciting development here. We're going to have a host of guests that'll be joining
mm,
us. We'll be having guests from around the world, from different ideas, different backgrounds. And the idea is hear their stories, understand where they came from, their interests, and hopefully we can have discussions on new ideas and discuss current events,
mm.
and really the topics that may be of value to the listeners and the viewers. So we're very excited about that. But for today, we're going to have a video, a reaction to Jordan Peterson. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson, Mussy? And what do you know about him?
Y- Yes, yes, I'm familiar with his content, and occasionally, I wouldn't say I really follow him, but occasionally I'll follow snippets of his speeches
Mm-hmm.
because he does talk about um, recent speeches on like social issues in the world today, and especially provides solutions or ways to kind of combat those social issues if as a society we do them. So and he's one of the few. What makes him interesting? He's one of the few psychologists that I kind of follow. Many psychologists, it tends to really kind of turn me off, and they're a little bit in fairyland kind of thing. But he's what caught my interest. He's a psychologist, but he speaks on a lot of the relevant issues that's happening in the world in a common sense and a logic way. So that's what's kind of caught my attention with Jordan Peterson.
Yep. And I agree as well. I actually follow him quite a bit. Um, really appreciate his insights because, like you were mentioning, you can tell he's thought about it.
Mm,
He is read the science, and really, he also has been looking into the mythological or the metaphysical. He talks a lot about um, creation accounts in different religions, even in the past, ancient accounts. He just talks about general myths and how they're really packed with a lot of knowledge, and that it's foolish of us to just disregard them, right? And just be like, oh, those old people back then, they weren't intelligent like we are because we have science. Science has been great, but science also has certain weaknesses. And so the video today that we're going to react to is a video that just came out recently, and it's for his new tour. It's called the We Who Wrestle with God. He has been surprisingly, it's almost like he's becoming more religious as time goes by, in my perspective.
mm,
And he's really trying to do in this talk, and we're going to start about halfway through it, and we probably won't watch the whole thing. We're going to focus on where he says that the idea of the Western civilization is based off of, and he says it's the Bible is the
Mm.
basic library that the Western civilization is built off. And then he goes in and says a critical portion of that is the creation. And he's going to talk through and kind of give some feedback. So we'll just listen in and then kind of stop as we go along, Masi, and see what kind of thoughts and ideas come up as we listen to him. Sound good?
Let's go. Yep, sounds good.
Hero worships the boy down the street who's the baseball star because that boy portrays a pattern of skill and attention that is the next appropriate developmental step for the hero worshiping child. That's a recreation of the religious impulse, the impulse to look up, admire, and imitate. The question being, to what should we address our attention? Upward looking, admire, and imitate. That highest possible object of apprehension and admiration is by definition God.
I think that's an important thing to kind of discuss there, Masi. Any thoughts where he says, whatever we put at the highest thing, the highest level that we look up to, that we want to imitate, that we want to pursue, whatever that is God. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. Right. And I only say that because everyone has something that they value the most, right?
Mhm.
And if God is the highest, you are able to navigate the rest. But if God is not the highest, and maybe he's like third or somewhere else, that can create a lot of gray areas in a lot of people's lives. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Especially in this day of age where we as a society are a lot more wealthier than the previous generation, and it's only going to trend that way. And the more um, man created, man made philosophies just regarding our beliefs and certain traditional and generational truths that's lasted thousands of years have kind of intercepted in a lot of people's ideas and swayed them and pretty much indoctrinated many people. So to me, if you do not have God as the forefront, you are going to be dealt with a lot of situations that you're going to be in the gray area that may affect you in a negative way. Does that make sense?
No, 100%.
So yeah,
I do
I do
align
agree.
with that.
Yeah, so I do agree with Jordan Peterson saying everyone does have a God,
Yeah.
right?
And you can't avoid it.
Yes.
That because we're beings that we're looking to be elevated, right?
Mm,
We're always wanting to say what's next, what's next. Some of the things that I think are interesting, especially after listening to your comments, and when you were mentioning, the development of wealth and
mm,
how that presents certain challenges, I think it's very interesting, as we discussed in some of our other podcasts, that in Moses 1, in Joseph Smith's translation of Genesis, he tells Moses that you will be in similitude of my only begotten.
mm,
And that to me invites us to say, hey, if we want to see certain ideas or patterns about the Savior and his role, um, pre-mortal role, creative role, and also as a Savior role, there's going to be a lot of overlaps with Moses.
mm,
And one of the things that I thought was interesting that you brought up, because the wealth, science has developed so much wealth and it's brought so many good things,
mm-hmm,
but that wealth has also become a problem. And what comes to mind is when God sent the manna,
mm.
right?
To the Israelites.
To the Israelites, God gave them very strict instructions. He said, only take what you need for that day, right? And they would eat it. And then some of them wouldn't listen and they tried to take more,
Yeah,
right? And whenever they did that, they would wake up the next day and it was maggots, it was all bad and
right.
went
Yeah.
bad, rotten. Except for Saturday, or Friday, I guess technically Friday, because they were the law of Moses, the day before the Sabbath, God will say, get what you need for today and then get sufficient for the next day. And
Mm.
whenever they did that, it didn't go bad.
Yeah.
So that is also, it seems to be the discussion on wealth. Wealth is a good thing in many
Mhm.
ways, but it has to be managed appropriately. Because why? It becomes a degrading factor in society. I'm not saying if you're wealthy, then it's bad. What I'm saying is the overconsumption, the overemphasis on the building of wealth,
Mm.
that becomes the problem. God wants you to be productive and to contribute to society. That's not the problem. But when you're just thinking about self-absorption and not
Mm.
thinking sufficiently, that seems to have certain negatives. That's what that story may be indicating to us, right?
Nice.
Is
Mm.
trying to take more than you need excessively for your own gain and for your own benefit. It rots within you and it can cause a lot of problems. So yeah, it's very interesting. I think that's really important. A lot of people dismiss religious beliefs because they're like, oh, you believe in a God. In my mind, everyone believes in a God.
Yeah.
And to me, the Christian God is asking us something. He's saying, please make me your God.
Mm.
Choose me to be your number one. You can choose something else. And then, like you're saying, that can lead to a lot of negative outcomes, but
Mm.
that's up to you because you chose those. He's saying, please choose me and I will take care of things that you cannot take care of. So
Mm.
that's some thoughts there. Anything
No,
else, or
good.
should we jump
No, no,
back to it?
no. I was just gonna say that's a good explanation with the amount of representation of your wealth, comparing it to the Israelites when they were given pretty much, a lot of food in the wilderness, and just there's certain instructions. Because I believe, I really do believe that if it's a good thing to have wealth and be wealthy and do great things and run a great um organization or corporation in the world, but if that's the forefront of your priorities of your gods, like I said, it can be, you can create a lot of gray areas that can be difficult for you to 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 navigate life in a spiritual sense. But if you have God as the forefront, I feel like, and even just having God and or fearing God to a certain extent, that will help you tremendously in just the rest of your aspect of your life. But yeah, that's all. That's
No,
just
I
kind of
agree.
my personal
And no, and
opinion.
then and to add on to that, Masi, I think that the parallel from the manna is rely on God for the guidance. Like you were saying, it's having a healthy respect of where the source is
Mm.
and to rely on that source. If that source has certain guidance for you, whether through the scriptures, whether through the spirit, or whether through other people who are inspired,
Mm.
the Lord is inviting you take into account his counsel on how to manage that wealth.
Mm.
And it will be to your benefit. When you assume you are the only cause of that wealth and you are the best person to make every decision
Mm.
for that, that's when it rots,
Mm.
right? Because there are times that God will say, only take what you need. And then there are times he will say, take what you need for today and for tomorrow.
Yeah.
But you have to be inspired to know when those times are. You can't just solely rely on yourself.
Yeah. No, great point.
It's a definition. It's the highest aim that lurks behind all proximal aims. That's a good way of thinking about it. It's the upward aim as such. All right, how do you bring that down to earth? Well, let's start with Genesis 1. There's a characterization of God and man in Genesis 1. The story opens at the dawn of time, at the beginning of things. That's not exactly the beginning of time. That's usually how it's read, but it's more complex than that. It's not only the beginning of time in the linear sense, but it's the beginning of all things that begin. This is what happens every time something begins. This is what happens every time something new makes its entry into the world. It's the continual beginning that continually unfolds, that happened and is happening now and will always happen. It's the pattern of the emergence of order out of chaos that makes itself manifest in the form of your life.
So one of the things I want to add to that, Masi, and I think this is important. Before the creation account happens in Moses 1, God introduces himself to Moses as, I am without beginning of days or end of years. I am everlasting. Right? So he established, when he introduces himself to Moses, he says, I am never ending. But when it comes to the creation account, he says, in the beginning. So there's what I'm trying to bring to mind here is there's a contradiction there. And that contradiction means there's nuances that we need to try and understand. So a lot of Christianity says, the beginning was there was only God, and then God, started everything that exists. Well, there's some certain problems there, but what I'm getting to is when God is saying in the beginning, when something has a beginning, what's the automatic assumption? In order for something to be everlasting, it technically doesn't have a
beginning.
So when God is and remember, he's revealing this creation account to Moses.
Yeah.
The moment he introduces a beginning, we can automatically assume that there's going to be a end. Right? So we take that idea into account with the fact that God is everlasting. Then the beginning means, like he's kind of mentioning, he's touching on it. It's the beginning of something. Christianity has automatically assumed that that's the beginning of all things. What we're talking about is there was something that was going on before the quote unquote beginning. And that is found in Abraham chapter 3. In Abraham chapter 3, God is talking to people. He says Abraham says he sees intelligences, which is in the restored gospel, that is how the form in which we existed before we were spirits.
Okay, before we were spirits. Okay.
So there's that discussion of, well, God's talking to intelligences and he's also talking to spirits. But then in the creation account, there is a spiritual creation also in the creation account itself, right? Because there's a spiritual creation and a physical creation. But God in Abraham 3 is talking to people before the creation even begins. So the idea of the beginning means something started that will have an end. And that is, in my opinion, God identified an opportunity to take advantage of. And that's the reason why the heaven and the earth have to die. Because why? God already understood it had a beginning, and therefore it must have a end. And we come from outside of that. We were not created in the sense of we came into existence in the beginning, because why? If we had a beginning, we have an end. This is why in Doctrine and Covenants, God says man was always with God and has been and will always be for eternity. Because why? We didn't start at the beginning. If we had a beginning, we have an end. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to describe here? What I'm trying to describe is there's a story that's being put together, and the beginning is just the starting of that story. And as you go into the creation account, it slowly reveals what this story is kind of evolving into something. But I really want to say that the main thing is, if something has a beginning, it has an end. Therefore, if you and I, in theory, have a beginning, then we have an end.
Yeah.
But the doctrine says we have always existed in different forms, and God has helped us progress. But that's just a comment there that I wanted to add. Any
Quick
thoughts on that?
question. Yeah, I was gonna say. So, with this, I'm thinking, and you can kind of lead me if I'm going on the right path or not. But so, the beginning of time, when the creation of Earth, that is a segment of a store of the journey that we're in, right? So this is a journey of the beginning, and of course, there's gonna be an end of this creation of Earth and people that's gonna be involved in this journey. Is
Yes.
that correct? Is that what he's trying to say? That right? And then
Yeah. What?
of course, this
Yeah.
is one segment, and then when the Earth's life is all done, there's gonna be maybe something else, not like an Earth, but I don't know, like in our faith, there's another journey after this
Yes.
Earth that's have people gonna there's gonna be people involved in it, and of course, when that's done, that's the end of that's the beginning of that kind of journey or segment or part of our spiritual kind of journey of this part, and then there's going to be an ending of that. There's going to be another, so it's pretty much going to be a journey for everything. Is that, I don't know if I'm going on the right
Yes.
thing, or I
It's
don't know, but that's where I'm kind of thinking.
yeah, and a good way, maybe a good way to think about it is the parable of the wheat and the tares,
Hmm.
right? When you plant a plant for a season, it means it has a beginning and an end, right? And and so this idea of a beginning means once you introduce a beginning, it automatically has an end. Typically, I mean, God is God; He can do all things. But
Hmm.
just in simple terms, so yeah, it's the beginning of a journey with a purpose, and
Hmm.
once the purpose is achieved, then you go beyond the end. That's why the
Hmm.
earth must die. That's why the heaven must die. And then a new heaven and a new earth will come in its place. And we inhabit that new heaven and new earth if you've done what the Lord has asked you, meaning you have gone outside of the beginning and the end because you transcend that.
Correct. No, and I like the word you put with a purpose, because that journey that we're in, it's not just we're gonna come here and just do whatever we want without consequence. Like, there's like we just kind of do whatever, and like let's just say we don't recognize what we're doing if we're accomplishing our goal or our purpose in this time frame.
Yes.
Because if we don't, then there's gonna be a reason in the next journey, because you're gonna transition to another journey. But when you do transition, you're there's going to be experiences and choices that you have done that's going to lead you to maybe a journey that's probably predetermined for you, or probably be more difficult. That's what I'm trying to say is that
Yeah.
because each purpose is going to be, it's going to be judged upon according to God, according to your works that you've done, kind of thing, right? Because it's not
Mm,
just you're just going to be put on here like what you said with no purpose. It's almost like there's a purpose
yes.
with
And
you being on the journey.
we can heavily respond to that by saying this is why everybody says and everybody desires to know, why am I here? It is embedded in us. Like our DNA and our
Mm,
spirit knows we're here for a purpose,
mm,
right? And this comes back to when we discuss the godly creative pattern. When God makes you,
mm,
He's giving you a purpose.
mm,
So we have the creation account, and it says in the beginning, right? Which automatically says God knows that there's a purpose here.
mm.
And then what does He do throughout the creation account? He makes things, which you make something with a purpose in mind, meaning
Yes.
make this to achieve that, make this to achieve that. So by mere by being created and made, a purpose is implied. And
Okay.
that's what we're here to do. Is it's like we've been sent here and we're being told navigate and find the purpose so that you can achieve it. And
Mm,
that's what we're here trying to do. We're trying to find out what our purpose is And then once we've identified our purpose, pursue it. And it may be multiple purposes for different stages of our life.
Correct.
Right? Like your purpose could be in high school is to graduate high school. And even within high school, there are little purposes in between that. Our life is just a life of meaning and of discovery and achieving that purpose that we discovered.
Cool.
All right, let's jump back into it here.
How is the stage set? The Spirit of God hovers over the water, over the deep. You hear that in the Judeo-Christian tradition. God engenders the world ex nihilo, out of nothing. That's not how the story sets itself up. It sets itself up with the Spirit of God hovering above the waters, but it's not water. That's not the word. Water is one of the symbolic images, attempting to make what's being described clear using a sequence of complex metaphors. The word for the water over which the Spirit of God hovers is tohu vabohu, or tehom, and it means a lot of things. It means the dragon that lives at the bottom of the deepest well. It means the unplumbable depths of the most abysmal ocean. It means the water that brings forth life. It means the infinite well of possibility itself. It means the confusion that reigns when your world falls apart. It means the unstructured day that makes itself manifest when you wake up. It means all of that. It means the dragon that the archaic god sliced into pieces and made the world from. It means it's the Hydra that Hercules defeats to form the world. It's all of that. So what does that mean? It means that the spirit of being and becoming generates the world from possibility. What does that mean? That's what your consciousness does. That's what you do. So you think you're surrounded by a world of objects that you manipulate in a robotic fashion, but you're not concerned with the objects that are static. You're concerned with what you can dynamically transform. When you wake up in the morning.
Does that, any thoughts on that, Mussy?
No, you know, I'm just kind of learning kind of thing, and I'm just trying to do it. Did you speed it up a little bit faster?
Yes.
And I'm just trying to catch up with that, but yeah, I don't have any feedback at the moment right now.
Let me go. I did it at 1.5 just because it, I'll do it 1.25.
Okay.
Maybe it's a little too fast, but there's a couple things I want to see what your thoughts are on it.
Okay.
Mussy. First is what he talks about. You know how we think the world is a bunch of objects that we manipulate or whatever, but really we only care about the objects that are moving with us. Or that's what we were talking about earlier. We are beings looking for purpose, and we only see things that seem to have a connection to our purpose or what we think our purpose is. Right? That's because there's too many things in the world to look at. You don't have enough time to do everything that you see. You only have a certain amount of time. And so we only seem to connect with, this is why it's important who you choose to be or what you choose to be your God.
Yeah.
Because you can only interact with so many things, and you're going to invest your time and energy. It is only those things that you have set at your highest place that you will interact with. It's like everything else goes quiet, and that's the only thing you interact with. If money, if power, if deception is the only thing that you put at its highest place, well, guess what? The only thing is that you will see and do in the world are those things. And so it is with God. This is why when somebody says, I don't believe in God, and I say, I believe you. Because why? If you aren't seeking God, God won't reveal himself to you. So you will never believe in God. Belief is only a statement of your experience. And if you have no experience with God, then I believe you. You can't believe in God because why? You have no experience. This is why Alma in the Book of Mormon says, if you don't believe in God, which is basically saying I can understand it because you have zero experience with God, then do you at least want to have an experience with God? And if you at least want an experience with God, pursue that and let God reveal himself through that desire alone. So that's the part that he talks there. Now, coming back to day one
of the creation.
This is I think is my personal interpretation of day one is it is not a creative process. it is a very symbolic aspect, because why? It talks about light and darkness, but the sun, the moon, and the stars aren't until day 4.
Mhm.
So it doesn't seem to be talking about physical light. It's a very symbolic thing that's going on here. And like he talks about the tohu vavohu and tehom,
Mm.
those words in the Hebrew context are very symbolic words. And what it seems to indicate is, so God says, in the beginning, I created the heaven and the earth. And then all of a sudden, the creative process seems to stop. Because why? God looks into the deep, which is like chaos, and he sees something. This is why his spirit hovers over the water. It's hovering over the chaos, and it's like looking into it. And it's like, oh, Yahweh, something is going on that shouldn't be going on. That's what the waters represent. Like he's saying, it's the dragon in the deepest depth. It's the chaos, right? So in day 1, God's spirit is hovering over it, and it's like he stopped the creative process because he's like, I've identified a problem.
Mm.
Now, what could this problem be? One of the parables that could be explaining what this problem is the wheat and the tares, right? So God creates the heaven and the earth. That's like planting the wheat. Then the master and the servant go, and they come back the next day, and the wheat and the tare and the wheat pops up. But then all of a sudden they're like, wait a second. We only planted wheat. Why are there tares in there? So to me, that could be an indicator of, well, we built something, but somehow something that we did not build made it into the creation process.
Okay.
So the Spirit of God is hovering over it. And then, so there's this chaos. There's something going on. And then God causes darkness to come over the face of the water. So as far as I can see, that darkness, because, typically darkness is identified with evil, but because it's chaos and it says it's over the face of the water, what I believe is happening is that is a symbolic way of showing God covers the waters. God covers the waters so he can see into the depth, but whatever is in the depth cannot see God. Meaning God can understand what is going on in the waters, but the waters doesn't understand God's plan, and that God sees it. And then what does he do? Then he says, let there be light. So basically he sees an opportunity. He sees that there is something, and he inserts light after he creates the darkness over the face. Then he inserts the light, and the light becomes bright, and he says that's the light is good, and he calls the light day, capital D. And then the darkness in there is the night with a capital N. So it seems to be indicating there's a certain sifting of what's going on. And I believe that this is speaking about beings of some sort or powers of some sort, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, no, it does. It does. It does. And like I said, I didn't have any initial thoughts or anything because I'm still kind of learning, especially when we're talking about scriptures, um, and anything that involves with God the Father, Jesus Christ, and with their journey, and just trying to understand in a way that me personally is trying to make sense. So, no, I appreciate your feedback on that.
10-4.
Morning, what presents itself to you is a field of indeterminate opportunity. That's why you're worried, or perhaps excited, because you have something to grapple with that hasn't yet come into being. The possibilities of the day, and you might think, oh my God, I have so many things to do. I'm overwhelmed. It's too much. Well, that's the tohu vabohu. That's the chaos and confusion. That's a plethora of possibility. You're thinking, oh my God, how many ways are there for things to go wrong? Well, that's the multi-headed serpent that the hero always confronts.
And that's why it's critical that God has to insert the light. That's why God says, let there be light, because there's so much chaos that the question now becomes like, it's like there's a big problem and nobody knows how to address this problem. And then God inserts the light and says, let there be light. And he sees that the light is good. So basically, God is injecting or making a purpose. He's injecting the light. He speaks and the light comes up. Meaning I'm creating a purpose and an opportunity, or the correct word would be I'm making a purpose and an opportunity out of this chaos. And the fact that it has the darkness over it means that very few people know what that purpose is. It doesn't seem that the light or the darkness knows God's purpose, because the deep is covered in dark, but God knows what that purpose is. And it's not clear if the light and the day and the night know what that purpose is, but God is allowing that to play out.
Okay.
And what do you have to do with that? It's like, well, are you going to establish the order that's good in the course of the day? Because that's what you're called upon to do. And it's your recreation of what God himself does at the beginning of time that constitutes the action of your conscious on the possibility that's in front of you. You have a microcosm of plenitude and possibility right in front of you at any moment that you can wrestle into order if your aim is right. The process that God relies on to extract the cosmos, the order that's good, from the well of unformed possibility is the word. It's the logos. Well, what does that mean? How much hell can you bring into being by saying the wrong words to your wife? Right, now your wife is who she is, but she's also who she could become, as you've no doubt noticed many times. And you can extract out something good or something terrible from the possibility she represents with the cautious and loving application of your words, or with the careful and prideful and dismissive application of your words. And the world you live in will be radically different depending on which of those two approaches you apply. And that will be exactly the same with anyone else you talk to, and how you treat yourself, and how you interact with the world as such. Because there's a provision of possibility that you're offered as a participant in the process of creation that you formulate in accordance with your aim.
Kind of remember that, Masi, when he's talking about out of this possibility, and it is God's word, or Jehovah, right? Because it's God's word is Jehovah. That's Jesus. That the chaos is put into order. And that was the only way they were able to come out of the tohu vavohu and the tehom. The only way to move forward was God speaking. And keep that in mind in regards to Adam and Eve eating the fruit when we get there. But just kind of keep that in mind.
What's the insistence in Genesis 1? Aim up with love. So if you want to establish the paradise of your household in relationship to your wife and your children, you aim at what's best for the best in them. You offer them the security that you can imagine. That's the walls of the walled garden. So
I want to pause there real quick and just make an insertion. This is the reason why, and it only happens once, okay? Only on day 2 that God says, or at least this is in Moses. Let me see if it's in the darkness. In Moses, it actually is only in Moses. I'm looking at here on day 2 in Moses's translation. Let's add that here real quick. And this is why I think the creative process stops, Masi.
Yeah.
Is because of this saying right here on day 2. And I'll show it to you real quick.
Moses chapter 2, verse 6.
Yes. This is the yes.
Okay.
So that's why I say it's like he created the heaven and the earth spiritually, and then he discovers this chaos in the tohu vavohu and in tehom, and then he's like, oh man, we got to figure out a solution for this. He
Yeah.
he speaks the solution, the purpose, and then when it goes to day 2, it says, "And again I, God, said." So you can interpret this in 2 ways. He had to say it again, meaning he said it once and it didn't get obeyed, so he had to take care of it,
Mm,
or the creative process stopped, and now that he's addressed it, he's now
continue.
re-engaging into the
Oh,
creative process,
okay.
which is
Okay.
why he's saying "and again," because you go to every other day, he never says "and again." It just says, "On this day I said this, on this day I said that." But only on the second day he says "and again."
Interesting. Where do you tend to believe, those two explanations that you provided? I tend to believe the second one, he re-engages and then
Mhm.
continue the
Yes.
personification.
Yeah.
That's what I would lean towards, but I was just interested. Are you kind of still like 50-50 on it could be both, or is there a certain one that you think is
I lean
more
more towards he re-engaged and moved forward after he gave the purpose. And a big I draw for day 1 and going into day 2, I draw heavily on the parable of the wheat and the tares,
mm,
because when the servant says, "Hey, look, there's wheats, we or tare, we didn't plant tare," and the servant wants to go pull out the
the tear?
tares, and God says, "No, stop. Let the night grow together with the day." Because
Mm,
if we try to remove the night right now, apparently it may cause us to lose some of the day,
mm, okay.
right? And that's just like the wheat and the tares, the same thing. So I
Okay.
believe that's the purpose. He now has, okay, we're not going to clear it out. We're going to let them grow up together. And then the creation process, now that they made that decision, the
Mm,
creative process now moves forward after
okay.
that.
You present to them the challenge that allows them to unfold and develop optimally. And you do that appropriately if you're aiming at what's best, what's highest. And that's the Spirit of God that makes itself manifest on the waters of possibility. That's the embodiment, the source, the initial source, and the spirit of upward aiming ultimate love. You can understand this by understanding what sort of walled garden you produce in your own household with your aim. God wrestles with the possibility that's not yet manifest and creates the cosmic order as a consequence, in sequence, creating the fundamental divisions to begin with. The separation of light and darkness, that's the phenomenology of day and night, the separation of the land from the waters, the establishment of the dome of the sky over the disk of the earth, populates the world with its created beings, and on the 6th day produces man, and says in his own image. So now we have a characterization of.
So just to mention there, in Genesis 1 or
Hmm.
Moses 2, he makes male and female, right? On day 6.
Correct.
So that's the thing, is a lot of people, and it looks like even Jordan Peterson believes these are 2 separate creation accounts, which I don't prescribe to that.
Yeah.
But so see, that's why it gets confusing sometimes when they say, "Oh, he created man on the 6th day." Well,
Mm,
yeah, he created, but that was, like we discussed, from my perspective, spiritual,
yes.
which is why he says male and female created I
The same time.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
God, who's the dynamic process that gives rise to order from possibility itself, in keeping with the highest possible aim. And we have a characterization of the human being as a microcosm of that process. The
Mm,
notion that each of us has a worth that's transcendental and not given by the state, not given by yourself, not given by other individuals, is predicated on that image. I mean that historically, and I mean it conceptually.
And I think, see, this is really important from my perspective. He's correct, but he's making the assumption that that is a physical creation. What I'm getting to in my belief is
the
that is a
spiritual.
spiritual, and that's a spiritual body, and what transcended or existed before the quote unquote beginning is the intelligence that is inserted into that spirit. And that spirit is made in the image of God.
I have a quick question too, because is it, would you say that most people in academia, when they read through the creation, most of them do believe there's a two separate accounts?
99% of them.
Because I'm
Almost every academic that they
Yes,
say, because they can't marry the two. They say
correct.
the two use different words, a different
Correct.
word for God, a different word
Uh,
for the creative process. It uses form instead of
mm,
make and create. They see the discrepancies, and
yeah.
then they say it doesn't make sense. They made man on the sixth day on this one, but then
Mm,
on this one it doesn't have days, and then it makes Adam first and
mm,
then Eve. And on the other one, the animals were made on day 5. But on the second one, Adam was formed first and then the animals after. They see
yeah.
all those discrepancies and they say two different stories.
I only say that because the last episode we kind of did on Ward Radio, that BYU professor believed in, believed that there was two separate
Stories. Yeah.
stories or accounts of the creation, while the other guy, who's not really the academic,
Not the
but they
non-academic.
yes, non-academic, he believed there's just one creation, but they were talking about other things, but yeah, I just and then when Jordan Peterson believes in two separate accounts, that's why I was like, oh, I'm starting to see a trend here, so that's why I thought I'll pose a
Yeah.
question to you.
No, it is. I let me put it this way. I haven't seen an academic that says it is one account.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
The notion is that, one of the notions is that the state itself has to grant to you the worth of someone created in the image of the creator himself, in order even for the state to exist, maintain itself, and transform. That the state itself cannot function unless it establishes a sacred boundary between its operations and the operation of the psyche, the human spirit, that's a manifestation of the God who generates the order that's good from possibility.
Okay. This is the idea I want to pitch to you, Masi. And
All
we
right.
actually had a comment on YouTube
Mm-hmm.
on your question where you were saying, like, why would anybody like consider Lucifer?
Mm,
Right? You remember we had that discussion on that
yes.
that podcast? Okay. So Jordan Peterson here is discussing how the image of God is injected into the creation, the spiritual creation. He's taking the interpretation that this is talking about the formation of man, and I agree with the principle, right? Like the government or the administrative body of here on earth, in the physical earth, when it's executed correctly, has to recognize that every man and woman is in the image of God, and that the government is subservient and must recognize that
Mm,
uniqueness of man.
mm,
Okay. Okay. And that's pretty much, I mean, I think politically you and I agree on that, right? And like that
mm,
in theory, government needs to recognize the God-given rights of every individual, and that
correct.
the government cannot impose any will upon the individual because of the fact that we're made in the image of God.
Mm,
Okay. Okay. But the government is very powerful, and God doesn't always impose himself in the government here in this life, and
mm,
he lets a lot of things play out. Now, what I'm going to propose to you as a potential answer as to why so many people were willing to consider Lucifer, remember that the creation is all spiritual, and that the image of God is injected into every man and woman in the spiritual creation. There is a possibility that there was a government slash managing oversight in the spirit world
mm-hmm.
that did not have God interfering in it every single way, right? Because, like we discussed, it didn't seem like everyone knew that God and Jehovah were God and Jehovah, right? Like that seems to be a potential reason why we didn't just automatically, because if you knew God the Father is all powerful in all things, then why would you think of any other option
Mm,
unless that wasn't clear?
mm,
And one of the things I'm using to potentially be the reason why it wasn't clear is because why? The darkness that covered the tohu vavohu in the beginning, and only God speaks and inserts the light, that when we were created spiritually, there was some type of organization. And this seems to be relatively clear because why? When Joseph Smith and these guys reveal themselves through visions to prophets today, do you know one of the things that they say that shocked them? They thought, you mean they go to the other side of the veil and they're more busy over there
mm,
than they are over here.
mm,
And this may be one of the reasons why President Nelson is consistently advocating we need to not just worry about the gathering of Israel here on earth. We need to be very active in gathering Israel beyond the veil as well. So what
mm,
I'm saying is, if we look at everything around us as a potential mirror of how things were before, that there could have been a government type situation in the spirit world where Lucifer could have been extremely influential and could exercise certain amounts of power and influence.
mm,
And that pressure and that deception that he could impose could have been the reason why some people were like, yeah, the guy's been in charge. He's, you know what I mean? He's in a position of power. He's um, a son of the morning, somebody
mm.
of power and influence. I'm just saying that is a potential idea behind it. That's just a idea that I don't have any backing or anything scripturally. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
observe how we are now. And one could see how someone could have influence in a governmental structure, and whether it's a priesthood government structure probably or whatever, that could have certain amount of influence over us, um, and could, carry that weight but not be directed by God directly. I don't know, just some thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, no, no. Thank you for that. And while we're on this conversation, I'm just thinking. So I understand with the followers, why they would follow Lucifer, right? During this whole process of you know picking uh, the first man and also this who's going to be the savior. I was just thinking, for Lucifer by himself, when he's doing all these, putting this all into work, he is it possible? Because I feel like God the Father has indefinite power because of the intelligence or spirits that are on his side, right? And
Mhm.
I'm just thinking was Lucifer also thinking if he gathered, let's just say, more spirits or intelligence than God the Father, is it possible that Lucifer becomes the same level or even powerful? Because I feel like it depends. Does it depend on that? I mean, is that possible? I'm just thinking out
Yes,
loud. Like, I'm
I
just
see
trying to
what I
think,
see your question. Yeah.
yes. Because I feel like, well, if he has more followers, does that give him more power or surpass? Because I'm just trying to think, Lucifer, why would he put so much effort into all these works?
Yes.
Because there had to be a possibility, or not, or I think I even talked to you about this before. Or is there somebody that's even higher than Lucifer that we don't? That they don't really. They only put Lucifer as the highest opposition of everything that's righteousness. But I don't know. I'm just thinking
No,
out loud.
I mean, I can give you some general ideas on that.
Yeah,
So in theory, Lucifer can never go above God because God created him,
correct.
right?
Okay.
In theory.
Okay.
So
Okay.
right there in theory. But the idea of collecting spirits to obtain glory is, I think, is very real, because
Okay.
kind of that scripture that we talked about, the glory of God is intelligence. And you can say, oh,
Mm,
it's intelligence in the brain, but God's glory is the fact that he is God and he is our father, and we
mm,
we we praise him. And
mm,
And God doesn't have to go do anything, because why? He can speak to us and we go do what he says.
Correct.
That's what makes him powerful. Like for example, God doesn't have to deal with Lucifer. He has Jesus. And even Jesus doesn't have to deal with Lucifer, because Jesus has Michael, who is Adam. And
Correct.
in theory, one could say, yes, there is someone more powerful than Lucifer, because according to our understanding, it was Adam who cast out Lucifer.
Mm.
He did it by the power of Christ, but Christ has the power of
God the Father.
the Father. So yeah, so that would be my answer. Is in theory, Lucifer could never take that, because
Okay.
the Son could never be above the Father. Just like for us, we can never
Yeah.
be above our Father, because why?
Yeah.
You remove our Father, you remove us. So
Mm.
it's impossible. It's
Okay.
like those people who want to destroy America, but then
Yeah.
go and practice their First Amendment, right? You're like,
Yeah.
wait a second, that doesn't make sense.
Mm.
You exercise your First Amendment by wanting to destroy the thing that gives you your First Amendment. But if I destroy the thing that gave you your First Amendment, then you have no First Amendment. It's like God. You try to remove God. Well, if you remove God, then there is no Lucifer, because God made Lucifer.
Okay, gotcha.
But he was tempted to collect us, because that would give him certain power.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So the idea of him enslaving us, it's no different than here. What's the most powerful resource on earth? Human beings. And that's how people try to gain power, is they enslave, or that's the reason why government wants to oppress
Yeah.
people, because people are the most valuable resource. We come up with new ideas, we build things, we develop things, we are dedicated, right? When you're committed to someone. And so what's the biggest resource is people, but what's also the biggest threat? People that won't listen. And that's kind of my response to those questions, Masi,
Okay.
if that makes
No,
sense.
thanks. No, thanks. Thanks for that.
Ask, well, who believes that? And I would say, try talking to one person once without believing that, and see how it goes. We call to each other all the time, especially in our intimate relationships, to be treated as if we are the locus of value. And if you treat people that way, if you regard them that way, if you perceive them that way, if you encourage them in that pathway of development, everything in your interactions with human beings will open itself up to you and fill your life with abundance. Everyone wants to be treated that way. And the reason for that is it's in keeping with our essential nature. And that hospitable, welcoming, encouraging, upward aiming, loving treatment is the aim and attitude upon which the soul, the community, and the natural order itself depends for its integrity.
I think that's a really interesting and important concept you just shared there, Masi. And that is, all these materialists, people who don't believe in God, and we're just, flesh and bones, we're just animals like other stuff. We just have
Once
a little
we
more
die,
intellect.
that's it. Yeah. Once we die,
what he's saying is, try to talk to someone and just think they're just a bag of bones and flesh. He says it ruins the whole interaction. We don't treat each other as if you're just flesh and bones and just like, oh, you just die and it ends. When we interact with each other, we recognize each other as human beings, and that there is something innate in all of us that makes us unique and special. When you take that away, this is why communism is so dangerous, because it removes God. And then when you remove God, you remove the fact that each individual carries the image of God and is a son and daughter of God. And when you remove that, then everybody is just like cattle. Yeah, if we kill 100 million of them, then so what? It's good for the earth. So that's what he's saying is, when your natural instinct is to treat people as if they quote unquote have the image of God. That's how we naturally treat each other. And when you do that, guess what? Things go well. Things flourish, right? And it's that's because why? That's the way it's supposed to be. When you start looking at people as just, a resource to get me more wealth, an opportunity just to get more power, or, below you because somehow you're much greater than them, then all of a sudden things go really bad in a hurry. And then all of a sudden there is concentration camps. There are hundreds of millions of people being killed. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing. And these materialists and atheists and stuff, they think that us recognizing our eternal potential in all of us is like a given, something we've developed, but we digress so quickly to devalue human life so quickly that you remove God from the picture, and then all of a sudden millions of people are dying.
No, you brought up a great point. Just with even if you are an atheist, that means you got to at least acknowledge there's still right and wrong. And in the scriptures, it does say every good thing or righteous thing comes from God. So when he says thou shalt not kill,
Yeah.
right, that is a commandment from God. So even if you, and that's why I say with the whole building of civilizations, a lot of civilizations, especially Western civilizations, are building that concept of, thou shalt not kill, because it's just inherently wrong just to go and kill somebody. And that is because we're all sons and daughters, of God.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, if you are really an atheist, then you could, like what you said, then every human being walking around can be viewed as a chicken, a cattle, or a bunch of swines and stuff, and you shouldn't feel bad or anything if they are removed just like that for no reason, or
Yep.
they come and remove yourself for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, that's, and we're starting to see it kind of play out in Western, or there's starting to be some some instability happening in a lot of these Western countries, because there is that perception of people in influence positions who are really kind of atheists and are viewing people as flesh and bones, or like
Yeah.
animal. So
And even
and
worse, Masi, they're
yeah,
viewed as the cancer, the problem.
yes, yes, yes. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing those times playing out, and if we, which I think most of the people still in the world, and even in the Western countries, still view um, themselves as a person or son and daughter of a higher being of God, that we need to kind of rectify before it gets to a position that we do lose quite a few of our brothers and sisters, accidentally, so, or as a consequence. But yeah, no, good point that you brought up on that.
Excellent.
Country is predicated on that notion. The idea that each of you is endowed with inalienable rights and their requisite responsibilities is a direct reflection of that conceptualization. And one of the things you might frequently remind yourself of is the fact that your country wouldn't be what it is, which is the closest approximation to a shining city on the hill that's been established so far in the travail of mankind without that fundamental conception. Right. So then you might say, well, is it true? And the answer is, it's not hell. I mean that, because lots of countries are hell. And they're hell in a way that opens up into an abyss and has the possibility of a deeper abyss waiting latent within it, which will open up with the possibility of a deeper abyss within that. And that's what happens when that fundamental characterization is overthrown in a revolutionary manner or carelessly abandoned. And we saw that for all of us who are non-believers and no longer conceptualize the metaphysical hell as real. We saw the metaphysical hell realized in the 20th century many times. In case anyone, having abandoned their metaphysical presuppositions, was so blind that only an object lesson would suffice. Right? Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union under Stalin, the Chinese Communist Party under Mao. If that isn't close enough to hell for you, then I would say you should pray that you aren't introduced to something even worse, for the purposes of convincing you about what's real.
See, this is the Alma the Younger saying, you know, it's better that you believe because you choose to believe, because you're humble naturally, you humble yourself, than it is to be humbled. And that's what he's referring to. When you reject God to the extent that you are going to abolish him, then the only way to hopefully give you a chance to change your mind is to have a glimpse of hell. And that's what it devolves into. And that's because why? You aren't following what God has determined to be good. And you become your own God, or you put some ideology or philosophy above God. That's when you end up with what he's talking about. And the one thing that did pop up to my mind is, if hell can manifest itself by denying God, then the inverse is correct. Heaven can manifest itself when you draw nearer to God, even though you're in a fallen world.
Agree with that. Yep.
In the second, God announces four things once he creates man. He says, man is to tend the garden. That's his purpose. Why a garden? It's a walled garden, actually, because that's what paradise means, walled garden.
So now he's jumped into the formed story, right? So now man's been formed and his job is to go to the garden.
Why a walled garden? Well, a garden is a place of nature, obviously, and walls are a place of culture. And a walled garden is a place of nature encapsulated in a manageable manner by the walls of culture. That's what your backyard is. It's a yard, it's nature, it has walls. The walls are culture. The walls you could think of as physical entities, as objects, but your lawn has borders if you don't have a fence. And your neighbors know where the borders are. And where are the borders? They're in the imagination of your neighbors. I'm dead serious about that. The walls, it's so funny because you'll see people in the border between Canada and the United States. They'll get out and they'll step across the border. It's like, as if it's an object, as if it's an entity that's there on the ground. And people know that that's magic in some sense, because the grass in Canada is only slightly less healthy than the grass in the United States, let's say. It's easy to concretize that, but the idea of a walled off space in a communal society is a social agreement. You have your domain, your house, your garden, your backyard. That's enough cosmos for you to say.
So real quick, my thoughts on this, because we've come out of day one, we've just done all the spiritual creation, right? But the physical creation has not been accomplished fully yet. Right? And so because you have the chaos from day one, that on the spiritual side, the spiritual creation is pretty much complete, but the physical creation is not done. So you need a parameter of walls of structure for Adam and Eve to be in, to be able to continue the forming process. And when he gets to it, the naming of the animals by Adam is my evidence for that. But that's where I'm saying the Garden of Eden represents a middle space between the heaven and the earth, and the Garden of Eden seems to be right in the middle. And it seems to be Adam's responsibility to connect the spiritual and the temporal. That seems to be the role that he's kind of taking here, but we'll dive deeper in it when he gets to it. But just kind of keep that in mind, that's why a garden is needed. You only need a wall if there's chaos on the
Other
outside.
side. Mm.
If there's no chaos, then everything's great.
Mm.
This is one of the reasons why I'm somewhat hesitant to say that the Garden of Eden was on earth directly. And there's certain language that makes me think so, because Adam and Eve are formed, then they're taken and placed in the garden, right? And then there's other things too with the animals. The animals they're formed, and then if they're already on earth and Adam and Eve are right there, they would have said, yeah, Adam and Eve named them, or Adam named them. They say no. They form it, then they say, go to Adam
to receive your name
and get to receive your name.
Mm.
So, but we'll stop it when we get closer to that and discuss that.
Okay.
Right. And perhaps if you're competent enough to do more, you'll expand your garden so that you have more to tend. But you start with a walled garden of some size. And if you tend it properly, then the promise is that as your competence grows, so will your dominion. Man said.
And remember, who established that garden? It was God, right? It was God who planted and prepared that garden. So God is the one who, once again, is establishing the order, not Adam. And so, yeah.
Then to tend the garden and to name everything that's in it. This is Adam. What is it? What does that mean? Well, it's the Logos again. It's a re-representation of the creative spirit of God that makes itself manifest when time begins and when new things come into being. Our ability to name, our ability to speak, is that in the microcosmic manner. That's what we're capable of doing. That's what the patriarchal spirit does, is name and order the world. And God brings everything to Adam to see what he'll name them. And that's a reflection of the idea that we have a created order, but man has a place in it. And the place is to organize it and to put everything in its proper place and to assign it its identity. And that's no different than the prioritization of attention that's part of the story.
Okay. So let me kind of share what I believe is going on here, because we've just gone through make and create, right? We're now in the forming stage with Adam. Now, the godly creative pattern is a continual process, right? And I'll give you an example, just like right now. As we go through this world, we have to find a purpose, right? And sometimes that purpose we have to generate ourselves. Sometimes we pray to God to inspire us so that we can develop. That's the making, Masi. Where when we pray and we ask for revelation, what we're asking for is, God, kind of expand my capacity that you've given me as a son or a daughter of God to make things, meaning give something purpose. Whether it's, go to school. Yeah, I go to school, but I could be inspired to make something more beyond just education. I could build relationships. I could serve other people. We're beings that make things. We've inherited what we've discussed is the godly creative process. We make things. This is what the naming of the animals symbolizes. Because remember, what happens on the seventh day?
Rested.
God the Father has rested. Right? And then it goes to Jehovah, and Jehovah is kind of more of just general oversight, but who has dominion over the earth? God says, let man have dominion over the earth, meaning I've rested. Jehovah continue the monitoring, but let Adam kind of take that role. Like I said, there's still some chaos in the formation. That's what the animals, when the animals come to Adam, we think, oh, he's giving him a name. It's like, no. He's exercising a godly attribute. That's what he's describing. He's exercising a godly attribute, meaning this thing has 4 legs. It runs really fast. Looks like it can run. Your responsibility is going to be, you're a fast runner. You're going to be a whatever, right? And that is making the animal. Then when you make something, when I say make it, you're giving it a purpose, but that's not the end of the creative process. when you give something a purpose, just like God makes us, he doesn't then just walk away. He also has to create it, meaning a spiritual development has to happen to that animal to achieve the making. And then when the spiritual creation is completed, then it must be manifested physically. That's no different than you and I. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say
No,
there?
it does. No, it
Right?
does. Yeah.
So when you have an idea, you've been inspired by God, you have to then, okay, I've made something, or God has helped me make something, then I must develop the faith
Mm.
to create it spiritually in my mind and come up with a plan and say, this is the purpose, this is how this is going to work. And then the next step is make it a reality.
Mm.
Make that, after you've made it, then you've created it spiritually in your heart and in your mind. And then the next thing is build it in the
Form it.
physical
Yeah.
world,
Mm.
right? That's literally the invention process,
Mm.
right? And so that's what Adam, it seems to be what Adam is doing, is because God the Father has rested, the maker and the creator, and Jehovah has now been the oversight. And since God the Father as the maker and the creator has rested, it seems to fall on Adam to continue the creative process. That's quote unquote becoming like God. That is
Mm.
the image of God. And here's an interesting story, just as a side bit. When I read the Quran, there's an interesting story about Adam in the Quran. And the story goes like this. So God proposes to the angels. God says, I have an idea. I'm going to create this new being. And this new being, I'm going to give it like the ability to choose. And this being may choose to not obey me all the time, but
Mm.
I'm going to create this new being. And this is Adam, right? And the angels go to God and say, why would you create such a being? Like, we give you like praise. We always obey you. Like, why would you create such a being? And God says, hey, don't counsel me. I'm God.
Mm.
So God goes and makes and creates Adam. And after he's created and then formed Adam, God then tells the animals to go to the angels. And then God asks the angels in the Quran, name the animals. And the angels say, we can't. Only you, God, can name them because we don't have the knowledge.
Mm.
When they answer that, then he says, then God tells the angels basically, well, watch, Adam. Well, he teaches Adam. He says that God taught Adam, and then Adam turned around and named the animals. And so we see a distinction between angels and man. And
Mm.
that is, God has endowed man with certain the image of God, that Adam can and man can do things that the angels can't. And then
Mm.
God says, see, didn't I tell you I'm God? This is why you shouldn't have questioned me.
Mm.
This is why I made Adam. So it's kind of an interesting kind of
That is
storyline in
interesting.
the Quran,
Mm.
because it gives tie to what Adam's doing in what he's naming. He's not just sitting around, oh, you're a pig, oh, you're a horse. It's a symbolic way of packaging the story so that if you can understand it correctly, you can see, oh no, he's exercising the same godly pattern that God and Jehovah were doing recently. He's practicing to be like his father,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And that's a good insight on the Quran, and it really kind of emphasizes Adam's role.
Yes.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Mm. Correct.
And with that being said, thank you, everybody. Aloha.
Aloha.